John Steinbeck was born in 1902 and received the Nobel Prize 60 years later for, according to the Nobel Society, his ambitious social perception, or his choice to write about serious topics with little concern for offending others. Using the hardship he endured early in his life, Steinbeck developed personal conclusions about human nature and applied them to his slightly autobiographical writing. His own assessments regarding human nature are prevalent in his work, and the audience is able to interpret many of his plots through the eyes of Steinbeck himself. Steinbeck fits the quota for the Nobel Prize because he presented American lives that were typically comfortable in new and sometimes off-putting settings. His work aligns with the phrase ideal direction because he was able to alter many views regarding human nature's true form, specifically regarding real morality in average daily lives. Although his messages were not always positive, they had deep and rich meaning in the lives of all Americans and could be integrated in multiple ways into the way that people of the time period were living. We believe that Steinbeck deserves the Nobel Prize because he encouraged his readers to reevaluate the morality of American life through a character-driven and detailed style of writing that can be viewed in each of his works.
Steinbeck is a celebrated author around the world.
Winner of the Nobel Prize in 1962, John Steinbeck gave voice to working-class America.
He writes about people we're not familiar with, but he makes them relatable to a general audience. In spite of the fact that he's writing about hobos and tramps and Okies and other people such as that, he manages to stress the universal condition that we all share.
John Ernst Steinbeck was born on February 27, 1902, in Salinas, California, a region that would later be the setting for many of his most famous works.
Steinbeck reflected California through the people and the landscape and the history. Not only was he a wonderful writer, but he was a great student of his own home.
Steinbeck enrolled in Stanford University in 1919, but eventually dropped out. He continued to write, but for years was simply scraping by, until 1935, when he would receive his first critical success.
Tortilla Flat was a huge bestseller. No one expected it. It sold 26,000 copies in its first year, which was astonishing during the middle of the Depression. It came out in 1935. This is a beautiful story about a gang of winos living in a rundown house in California just after World War I.
In 1937, Steinbeck's novella of Mice and Men became an immediate bestseller, and its play adaptation won him the New York Drama Critics Circle Award.
What he wanted to do was to write something called a play novelette. He was playing with a new form of writing. He wanted the story to be lifted from the book onto the stage. He wanted it played. He wanted it performed.
I think what appealed to readers about Of Mice and Men was the fact that it dealt realistically with the grim situation of the Depression and the inability of people to find work. But it also struck an emotional chord with readers because in spite of all that, there's this very strong friendship between George and Lenny, and that seems to compensate for what they don't have in their lives.
Steinbeck reported on migrant farm workers for the San Francisco Chronicle in 1939, providing the basis for his Pulitzer Prize-winning work,
The Grapes of Wrath. There are many examples of already poor characters being taken advantage of financially. One of these is a car salesman who says, "Going to California? Here's just what you need. Looks sharp, but there's thousands of miles in her, lined up side by side. Good used cars. Bargains. Clean. Runs good." On page 66. This is, of course, when the salesman is trying to sell a car to the Jodes, which, they do buy and try and use to get to California. Contrary to the salesman's promises of the car going thousands of miles, the car breaks down on the way to California, before they get there. And the salesman didn't know or care how long the car would last. All he cared about was getting sales and making money. And if some less fortunate people got hurt by his actions of unkept promises about this car, he wouldn't care. He's just all in it for the money. This kind of behavior is also seen on the actual voyage to California by the Jodes, specifically those in charge in California. A tire salesman and Jode converse. "That's what you think. Ever heard of the Border Patrol on the California line? Police from Los Angeles stopped you bastards, turned you back. Says if you can't buy no real estate, we don't want you. Says, got a driver's license? Let's see it. Tore it up. Says you can't come in without no driver's license. It's a free country. We'll try to get some freedom to do. Fella says you're just as free as you got Jack to pay for it," on page 120. In this passage, the state of California itself tries to take advantage of the many migrants moving towards it from the Great Plains to make a profit out of the situation in that state. To enter, they have to pay, which would seem not only immoral but also against the law, because it's like all in the same country. Like, why would you have to pay to go from state to state? They're trying to use the struggle of a great many people in the Great Depression to try and make money off of this very immoral practice. When selling their farm, the Jodes get the short end of the stick. Also, in this, Steinbeck narrates, "And the men in the seat were tired and angry and sad, for they'd got $18 for every movable thing from the farm, the horses, the wagon, the implements, and all the furniture from the house. $18. They had assailed the buyer, argued, but they were routed when his interest seemed to flag, and he told them he didn't want the stuff at any price. Then they were beaten, believed him, and took $2 less than he had first offered. Now they were weary and frightened because they had gone against a system they did not understand, and it had beaten them. They knew the team and the wagon were worth much more. They knew the buyer man would get much more, but they didn't know how to do it. Merchandising was a secret to them." And this is on page 97. The buyers gave them an awful deal for their farm because they knew that the Jodes were really desperate to try and get out of town and get to California, away from Oklahoma where they couldn't make any money. So they were just trying to sell it for any price they could, and the buyer knew that. So he took advantage of them and just stole that property basically for $18. That's nothing. The buyer could afford to give them a more fair deal. Like, he wasn't a poor man by any standards, but he wanted to make the most money out of it. Like, he was not looking. His morality meant nothing to him. He just tried to make the most money for himself. He didn't care about others. So those reasons are how people are taking advantage of in the Grapes of Wrath.
John Steinbeck, the author of The Wayward Bus and many other novels, is known for having no mind to be an unoffending comforter and entertainer with vigorous and realistic verve. His works are character-driven, just like life, which is why readers remain so drawn to it and consider him to be one of the best. In a unique fashion that set him apart from other nominees, Steinbeck is able to use character development intertwined with extensive detail to show how sacrificing morality and ethics out of self-interest is prevalent in human nature. The Wayward Bus is a prime example of how his style of seemingly unimportant details and immersive character development make him as recognizable as his writing is. His vision comes wonderfully to life in this imaginative and unsentimental chronicle of a bus traveling through California's backroads, transporting a very diverse bunch of people who are few and far between. While the ride on the bus gets longer, the amount of things that details become more enhanced to help develop the story greatly increase. As the plot progressed, characters that were finally about to make a bold statement about their situation would be revealed following a detailed description to grab the reader's attention. Like on page 156, she raised her glass of Pepsi-Cola and let the sweet, biting drink run down her throat in the middle of the swallowed despair settled down on her like a heavy gas. This is just one example that also incorporated symbolism into something as simple as a beverage, tying it into the fact that when Norma says this, she is swallowing her pride regarding her thoughts on an affair that happened, even though she may not want to. The details draw you in and make you realize what you missed before. In general, Steinbeck lately believed that as escape and resources became lesser and lesser, true values and actions of character would surely introduce themselves. Hence why we see him write a book about people stuck on a bus with the application of almost 10 protagonists without a major thing going on, allowing the reader to see the psychological literary lens, even if it is unintentional. When push comes to shove, Steinbeck has captivated audiences by writing about what people need to hear and not necessarily want to.
In East of Eden, Steinbeck delves more deeply into man's natural state and eventually dictates that while people are presented with the opportunity to be good, they will almost always act selfishly, whether that is good or bad. Steinbeck evolves many characters, but generally places them into two categories of good and evil. In each case, he maintains the constant theme that ethical decisions are based on which category an individual falls into, so while they have the choice to change, they will not, and they will always stick to their inherent category. To demonstrate which category individuals are placed in, Steinbeck uses his extremely descriptive writing and character development. He examines the character of Kathy in one scenario, and she is clearly evil, from her early upbringing as she moves forward with her life. Steinbeck describes Kathy as a young girl who, quote, would have been called possessed by the devil, and later, after she murders her parents, fakes her own death, poisons and kills the owner of a brothel, and blackmails an entire community, she shoots the father of her newborn children and runs away. Steinbeck says, "She shot him. The heavy slug flattened and tore out a piece of his shoulder blade, and then he could hear her no more." Essentially, Steinbeck uses East of Eden to prove the rigidity of human morals. To do this, he also reinforces his points using the biblical story of Cain and Abel, where one brother essentially becomes an outcast compared to the other one. In one case, on page 299, the teller of the biblical story says, "Thou shalt." That was a promise that Cain would conquer sin. Steinbeck utilizes this story that's found in the book of Genesis to indicate that the evil brother is bound to overcome his evil ways. However, the characters in the book are given the same opportunity to overcome their evil ways and become better, yet they ultimately revert to their old ways. In conclusion, John Steinbeck introduced many themes about man's natural state and how it pertains to character development. Using extensive detail, Steinbeck uses East of Eden to make very relevant points about how no amount of opportunity allows people to change, and Steinbeck's natural and realistic point of view allowed him to make these points very clearly.
In one of his latest novels, The Winter of Our Discontent, Steinbeck demonstrates his cultural importance through analyzing the ethics, or lack thereof, of the American dream. Through the development of the main character, Ethan Hawley, Steinbeck shows his readers the danger of putting success over happiness. Through Ethan, we see the societal pressures that are placed on people to succeed. This is shown through interactions Ethan has early in the novel. A trusted friend of his tells him, "Forget Mary and the children for a while. They'll like you better if you climb out of the hole." Steinbeck, page 15. And his wife tells him, "You could climb out of it if you didn't have your old fancy pants ideas. Everybody's laughing at you. A grand gentleman without any money is a bum." Steinbeck, page 34. These quotes reflect the flawed ideals held by Americans in the 50s and early 60s. As the story progresses, Ethan abandons all of his morals to obtain wealth, and, in the end, it leaves him empty inside. His guilt is so great that he attempts to kill himself. He enters the bay with a pocket full of razor blades. But as he stands in the water, he realizes the devastating effects that his actions would have on his family, and he decides not to go through with it. This decision came too late, however. I had to fight the water to get out, and I had to get out. I rolled and scrambled and splashed chest deep in the surf, and the brisking waves pushed me against the old sea wall. Steinbeck, page 276. Ethan's inability to escape the sea is representative of the irreversibility of corruption. This is why Steinbeck earned the Nobel Prize for Literature. His novels provide an in-depth and thoughtful analysis of the ideals held in his time period, and of the negative effects that they have. The Winter of Our Discontent was a message of realism in a time when America was filled with idealism.